She left the only home she knew with a suitcase, a promise, and a blizzard chasing her heels. The train wheezed to a stop at the Red Hollow station, its iron belly groaning against the December cold. Nora Beckett pressed her face to the frost-covered window, watching the Wyoming landscape blur into white nothing. Snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the horizon, making the world smaller with each passing moment. "End of the line, miss," the conductor called, his voice muffled by the wool scarf wrapped around his weathered face. "Best hurry if you're meeting someone. Storm's getting worse." Nora's fingers tightened around the worn leather handle of her suitcase. Inside, folded between her mother's Bible and 2 spare dresses, lay 4 months of letters from Matthew Reed. 4 months of careful penmanship, measured words, and promises of a new life far from the cholera-stained streets of Chicago. She stood, smoothing the travel dust from her dark wool skirt. At 27, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned early that taking up too much space invited scrutiny. But her shoulders, broad from years of tending to sick parents, refused to curl inward no matter how she tried. The platform stretched before her, wooden planks slick with ice. A handful of figures huddled near the station house, their faces hidden beneath hat brims and turned-up collars. None stepped forward. "Mr. Reed," she called, her breath forming ghosts in the frigid air. A man near the station door glanced up, then quickly away. Another spat tobacco juice into the snow. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against her exposed cheeks like tiny needles. She waited. 5 minutes, 10. Her toes grew numb in her city boots, not made for Wyoming winters. The other passengers had long since disappeared into waiting wagons or the warmth of the station house. Still, she stood, suitcase growing heavier with each moment. "You, the Chicago woman." The voice came from behind. Nora turned to find a boy, perhaps 15, wearing a coat 2 sizes too large and a skeptical expression. "I am Nora Beckett. I'm looking for Matthew Reed." The boy's eyes traveled from her mud-stained hem to her wind-reddened face. "He sent me, said to tell you he's at the church, said you should clean up first." He jerked his chin toward a building across the street. "Mrs. Patterson runs the boarding house. She's got a room." "The church," Nora's stomach tightened. "But I thought—" "Storm's coming fast. If you want to get married today, better hurry." The boy was already turning away, eager to escape back to whatever warm corner he'd emerged from. "Married today." The words rang hollow against the wind. In his letters, Matthew had written of meeting her at the station, of showing her the house he'd prepared, of a proper courtship even if brief, not this abandoned on a platform with ice forming in her hair. The boarding house squatted against the storm, its yellow windows promising warmth. Mrs. Patterson, a narrow woman with sharp eyes, took Nora's last traveling money without comment and showed her to a room barely large enough for the iron bed and washstand it contained. "Church is 2 streets over," she said, pausing at the door. "Though in this weather, might be wiser to wait." But waiting felt like surrender. Nora had already waited through 4 years of her mother's illness, 2 more of her father's decline. She'd waited through the estate settlement that left her with nothing but debts. She'd waited through letters from Matthew Reed, each one painting a picture of wide skies and fresh starts. She washed her face with water so cold it burned, pinned her dark hair tighter against the wind, and chose her best dress, gray wool that had seen too many washings but still held its shape. Her hands shook as she fastened the buttons, not from cold, from the dawning realization that she'd traveled 1,000 miles on the word of a stranger. The church stood at the town's center, its white steeple already disappearing into the storm. A small crowd had gathered inside, their face turned toward the door as she entered. And there, at the altar, stood Matthew Reed. He was smaller than she'd imagined. His letters had carried such weight, such presence, that she'd pictured someone to match. But the man before her barely reached her shoulder. his thin mustache twitching as his eyes traveled the length of her. "Miss Beckett." He didn't move toward her. "You're taller than I expected." Heat flooded her cheeks despite the cold. "Mr. Reed, I apologize for my delay. The weather." "Yes, the weather." He glanced at the assembled townspeople, then back at her. His jaw worked as if chewing something bitter. "Miss Beckett, I fear there's been a misunderstanding." The church fell silent save for the wind rattling the windows. Nora felt every eye upon her, measuring, judging. She kept her spine straight, though something cold that had nothing to do with winter settled in her chest. "A misunderstanding," her voice came out steady. Years of reading to dying parents had taught her to control her tone even when her world tilted. Matthew's hands fluttered at his sides. "Your letters gave the impression of a more delicate constitution, a woman of gentle bearing who would—" He swallowed. "I need a wife who makes me feel like a protector, a provider, someone soft, small, someone who needs me, someone who makes me feel bigger than I am." The words hung unspoken but clear. Nora's fingers found the letters in her pocket, their edges soft from handling. 4 months of correspondence crumbled into nothing. She'd written of her work caring for her parents, thinking it showed her devotion. He'd read it as a masculine strength that diminished his own. I see. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not before these strangers who watched her humiliation with the avid interest of those whose own lives lacked drama. "Then I apologize for the misunderstanding." She turned, but Matthew's voice followed her. "Miss Beckett, surely you understand. A man has certain expectations, certain needs in a wife." "Yes," she said, not looking back. "You've made your needs quite clear." The walk back to the boarding house stretched eternal. The storm had worsened, turning the world into a white wall of wind and ice. By the time she reached Mrs. Patterson's door, her hands were too numb to work the handle. "Rooms paid through tonight only," Mrs. Patterson reminded her, eyes avoiding Nora's face. News traveled fast in small towns, faster still when it carried the salt of scandal. "Tomorrow you'll need to make other arrangements." Nora climbed the narrow stairs to her rented room, each step an effort. Behind the thin door, she finally allowed herself to sink onto the bed. No tears came. Perhaps they too had frozen. Outside, the blizzard howled its arrival proper, sealing Red Hollow off from the world. She was trapped now, truly trapped, with no money for return passage and nowhere to go if she had it. Chicago held only graves and creditors. Wyoming offered only humiliation and cold. She opened her suitcase, touching each familiar item. Her mother's Bible, its leather cover worn smooth. The silver brush that had been her grandmother's. 2 dresses, 3 chemises, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world, carried 1,000 miles to nowhere. The letters from Matthew Reed lay at the bottom. She pulled them out, reading them by the flickering lamplight. How had she misread them so completely? But no reading them now. She saw what she'd wanted to see, a lonely man seeking companionship, a new beginning, hope. She'd been a fool, but fool or not, she was here now, with a blizzard at her back and nowhere to run. The wind screamed against the windows, and somewhere in that sound, she heard her mother's voice. "When God closes a door, Nora Jane, sometimes he expects you to build your own window." She folded the letters carefully and placed them back in her suitcase. Tomorrow, she would need to find work, shelter, a way to survive in a town where she'd already become a story told over kitchen tables. Tonight, she would sit with her humiliation and let it harden into something useful. The storm raged on, and Nora Beckett sat in its center, no longer the woman who'd stepped off the train with hope in her pocket. That woman had died in a church before strangers. What emerged would be someone altogether different, someone who would never again mistake promises for truth or letters for love. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight, She had walls against the wind and anger enough to keep her warm. The morning brought no mercy, only misses. Patterson's sharp knock and sharper words. "Sun's up, Miss Beckett. Room needs clearing." Nora had spent the night in her traveling dress, too cold and too numb to change. Her breath still misted in the frigid air of the unheated room. Outside, the blizzard had quieted to a steady snowfall, but drifts reached halfway up the windows, sealing the world in white. She counted her remaining coins. $3.40. Not enough for another night's lodging. Barely enough for food. Her stomach cramped with a hunger she'd ignored since yesterday's humiliation. "Mrs." Patterson waited at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed. "There's the hotel, but they don't take unmarried women. Tanner's saloon might have work, if you're that type." Her smile held no warmth. "Though after yesterday's spectacle, I doubt any decent establishment will have you." The words stung worse than the cold. Nora pulled her thin coat tighter. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Don't thank me. Thank the Christian charity that let you stay at all." Outside, Red Hollow lay buried under fresh snow. A few souls moved along the main street, heads down against the wind. Nora recognized some faces from the church, watched them recognize her in turn and quickly look away. She stopped at the general store, where warmth beckoned through steamed windows. The proprietor, a heavy man with kind eyes, shook his head before she could speak. "Sorry, miss, can't help you." "I'm a hard worker. I can sweep, stock shelves, anything." "It's not that." He glanced toward the street. "Matthew Reed's got influence here. His family owns half the valley's cattle. Word is you tried to trap him into marriage. Lied about yourself." "That's not true." "True or not, doesn't matter. Man like Reed says jump. This town asks how high." He softened slightly. "Try the Chinese laundry on 3rd Street. They might not care about Reed's opinion." But the laundry had no need for help. Neither did the bakery, the seamstress, or the schoolhouse. As the day wore on, Nora's circuit of the town grew smaller, her steps slower. The cold seeped through her city boots, numbing her feet until each step sent needles of pain up her legs. By afternoon, she found herself at the edge of town, where buildings gave way to snow-covered emptiness. An abandoned stable hunched against the storm, its doors hanging askew. She slipped inside, grateful for any break from the wind. The space smelled of old hay and older wood. Holes in the roof let in threads of gray light and occasional swirls of snow. But in one corner, protected by fallen beams, a small area remained dry. Someone had been here before a circle of stones marked an old fire pit, and a pile of relatively fresh straw suggested a makeshift bed. Nora sank onto the straw, pulling her suitcase close, her fingers stiff with cold. Fumbled with the clasps. She had one piece of bread saved from yesterday's travel, now hard as stone. She gnawed at it slowly, making it last. Night fell early in December. By 4 o'clock, darkness crept across the stable floor. Nora gathered what dry wood she could find, striking one of her precious matches to start a fire in the stone circle. The flames caught slowly, offering more smoke than heat, but it was something. She must have dozed, because she woke to voices outside. Saw smoke. Someone's in there. Could be that Chicago woman. Heard Patterson kicked her out this morning. Serves her right, trying to trick poor Matthew like that. Laughter, harsh and male. Nora pressed herself deeper into the shadows, heart hammering. The voices grew closer. Should we check, have some fun? Nah, too cold. Besides, Reed wants her gone, not complicated. Let the winter take care of it. Their footsteps crunched away through the snow. Nora remained frozen long after they'd gone, understanding flooding through her like ice water. They expected her to die out here, maybe even hoped for it, a convenient solution to the embarrassment she represented. She fed another stick to the dying fire, watching the sparks rise through holes in the roof. somewhere in Chicago. She'd had a life, small, perhaps, constrained by duty and poverty, but hers, she'd given it up for promises written in careful script, for dreams of wide skies and fresh starts. Her mother would have called it pride, reaching above her station. Her father would have been gentler, speaking of God's mysterious ways. But both were gone, and their God seemed to have forgotten her in this stable at the edge of nowhere. The fire died to embers. Nora pulled the straw around her, burrowing deep, but cold still found every gap in her clothing. She thought of the hotel's warm lights, the boarding house's thin walls that at least kept out the wind, all closed to her now. By midnight, the temperature had plummeted further. Ice formed on the stable walls, glittering in the moonlight that leaked through the roof. Her breath came in short puffs that hung in the air like accusations. Every survival instinct screamed at her to move, to find better shelter, but there was nowhere to go. She pulled out her mother's Bible, running numb fingers over the familiar pages. But the words blurred, meaningless in the face of such immediate peril. Faith required energy she couldn't spare. A sound made her look up. Snow sliding from the roof. No footsteps, deliberate and close. Her body tensed, ready to fight or flee, though she had strength for neither. "Hello in there." A woman's voice, old, cracked with age or cold. A figure appeared in the doorway, bundled so thoroughly only eyes were visible. "You the Chicago girl?" Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. "Thought so. I'm Clara Hensley. Live past the creek." She shuffled closer, producing a bundle from beneath her cloak. "Brought some things." "I don't need charity." "Didn't say you did. Said I brought some things." She set the bundle on the ground. "My daughter died last winter, about your size. Seems wasteful, keeping clothes that could keep someone warm." Before Nora could respond, the old woman was gone, disappearing into the snow as quickly as she'd come. The bundle contained a heavy wool cloak, mittens, thick socks, and a jar of preserved meat. Nora held the cloak against her face and wept the first tears since the church. She survived the night wrapped in a dead woman's clothes, grateful and ashamed in equal measure. Dawn came pale and bitter, revealing a world locked in ice. Her water had frozen solid. Her hands barely functioned, but she was alive. Alive to face another day of closed doors and turned backs. Alive to feel hunger gnaw at her stomach and cold settle in her bones. Alive to understand that Matthew Reed's cruelty hadn't ended at the church. It would follow her until she left or died. She stood on legs that barely held her, looking out at the hostile town. Somewhere, Matthew Reed was waking in a warm bed, perhaps already forgetting the woman he'd summoned and discarded. The town would help him forget, erasing her as thoroughly as snow-covered tracks. But Clara Hensley had remembered. One old woman, carrying her own grief, had seen Nora's humanity when no one else would. It wasn't much, but it was something, a thread of kindness in a fabric of cruelty. Nora gathered her few possessions, including the precious new clothes. She couldn't stay in the stable, another night would likely kill her. But as she stood at the door, looking out at the white expanse, she made a decision. She wouldn't run, not yet. Matthew Reed wanted her gone, expected her to flee or die. The town waited for her to disappear, validating their judgment. But spite could warm a person when nothing else would. She'd survive another day just to deny them the satisfaction. The stable door creaked as she pulled it shut behind her. Ahead lay Red Hollow, wrapped in winter's grip. She had no plan, no money, no friends save a stranger's ghost. But she had survived the night that was meant to kill her. It was a small victory, but she'd take it. Tomorrow could bring what it would. Today, she would walk back into town with her head high, wearing a dead woman's charity-like armor, and dare them to look away. The smoke caught his attention, first thin wisps rising from the abandoned stable where no fire should be. Elijah Ward pulled his horse to a stop, studying the scene with eyes trained by war to notice what didn't belong. He'd ridden down from his cabin at first light, needing supplies before the next storm hit. The barometer had been falling all night, promising more snow within days. Living alone on the hillside meant planning ahead, reading weather like others read newspapers. But this smoke troubled him. Too weak for a proper fire, too persistent for accident. Someone was trying to survive in there, and doing it poorly. He dismounted, boots crunching through fresh drifts. 32 years of living had taught him to mind his own business. The war had reinforced that lesson with blood and screaming. Yet his feet carried him toward the stable anyway, some instinct overriding good sense. The door hung open. Inside, huddled near a pitiful excuse for a fire, sat a woman. She looked up at his approach, and he saw acceptance in her eyes, not fear, not hope, just the flat recognition of someone who'd already measured the distance between living and dying and found it smaller than expected. "You're safe now." The words came without thought, pulled from some deep place he'd thought the war had killed. She blinked, as if trying to place the phrase in a world that had proven anything but safe. "Am I?" Her voice carried Chicago in its vowels, education in its clarity. That's a peculiar thing to tell a stranger. He stepped closer, noting the blue tinge to her lips, the way her hands shook despite her attempt to still them. "It's the truth. Come on, my cabin's not far." "I don't know you." "No, but you know that stable won't hold heat and another night will kill you." He kept his voice neutral, stating facts like weather. "I'm Elijah Ward. I live up the hill. I have food and warmth. Nothing else." She studied him for a long moment. He knew what she saw: a man who'd forgotten to cut his hair for too many months. Clothes patched and repatched. The careful distance he kept from town and its people. Not threatening, perhaps, but not reassuring either. "Nora Beckett." She tried to stand and stumbled. He caught her elbow, felt how thin her arm was through the heavy cloak. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday, no day before." She pulled away from his support but swayed on her feet. "I'm fine." "You're not." He gathered her scattered belongings, a suitcase that weighed almost nothing, the remnants of her fire. "But you will be." She followed because she had no choice. He knew. Pride might prefer death to charity, but the body had its own wisdom. He helped her mount his horse, noticed how she held herself rigid rather than lean against him when he swung up behind her. The ride to his cabin took 20 minutes through deepening snow. She said nothing, but he felt her taking in the landscape, the steep hillside, the thick pines, the isolation that wrapped around his home like armor. The cabin squatted against the hill, built sturdy against Wyoming winters. One room, but large enough, with a proper stone fireplace and windows that caught the morning sun when there was sun to catch. He'd built it himself after the war, needing walls between him and a world gone mad. Inside, warmth hit them like a physical thing. He felt her sag slightly, the heat undoing some rigid control she'd maintained. He guided her to a chair near the fire, noted how she kept the suitcase close, one hand always touching it. "I'll make food." He moved to the stove, giving her space. "Coffee first, then porridge." "Why?" He paused in measuring coffee. "Why what?" "Why help me? The whole town knows what I am, what they think I am." "I don't live in town." "That's not an answer." He poured water, considering, maybe I don't like watching people freeze to death. Maybe I remember what it's like to need help and find only closed doors. Does it matter? She was quiet while he worked. He felt her watching, cataloging the medical texts on his shelf, the surgical instruments wrapped in oilcloth, the absence of personal touches that marked a life lived in transit even when staying still. "You're a doctor." "Was." He set coffee before her, watched her wrap both hands around the cup like it might flee. "Now I'm just a man who lives on a hill." "The war." He nodded, not elaborating. She didn't push. They sat in silence while she drank, color slowly returning to her face. When he served the porridge, she ate carefully, trying not to show how hungry she was. "I can work," she said between bites. "I can clean, cook, mend. I'll pay you back for—" "No, I don't take charity." "It's not charity, it's porridge." He refilled her bowl. "Eat. We'll argue about debts later." She ate. He tended the fire, aware of her in his space like a discord in familiar music. It had been 2 years since another person had sat at his table, longer since he'd felt responsible for anyone's survival but his own. "They think I tried to trap Matthew Reed into marriage," she said suddenly. "That I lied about myself, presented myself as something I wasn't. Did you?" "No." She met his eyes directly. "I wrote honestly." He read what he wanted to read. When reality didn't match his fantasy, he blamed me for it. "That sounds like Matthew Reed." "You know him." "I know his type." He'd known too many men who built themselves up by making others small. The war had been full of them, wearing uniforms like permission slips for cruelty. She finished eating, pushed the bowl away. "I should go." "Where?" The question hung between them. She had no answer, and they both knew it. He stood, gathered the dishes, gave her the dignity of not watching her struggle with the truth. "There's wood needs splitting," he said finally. "I'd pay fair wages for help. Room and board included, temporary arrangement, until the weather clears." "The weather could take months to clear." "It could." She stood slowly, testing her strength. "I'm not looking for another proposal. Mr. Ward, I've had enough of men's promises." "Good. I'm not offering one. Just work for pay. Nothing more." "And you trust me, a stranger the whole town has branded a liar?" He turned from the sink, really looking at her for the first time. Not young, not old, tired, yes, but with steel beneath the exhaustion. A face that had seen too much and expected to see more, but hadn't broken under the weight. "I trust my own judgment. Always have." She considered this, fingers worrying at a loose thread on her sleeve. He could see her weighing options she didn't have. Pride against survival. Independence against necessity. "Temporary," she said finally, "until I can find something in town or move on." "Temporary." They shook hands, hers still cold despite the fire. He showed her the small lean-to room he used for storage, helped clear space for a proper bed. She worked beside him, quiet and efficient, already earning her keep. As afternoon wore on, snow began falling again. He watched her pause at the window, looking down at Red Hollow spread below like a judgment she'd escaped. For now. "Thank you," she said without turning, "for saying I was safe, even if it wasn't true. It was kind." It was true. He joined her at the window. Maybe not forever, maybe not from everything, but in that moment, in my keeping, you were safe. Sometimes that's all we can offer. She nodded, understanding more than he'd said. They stood together watching the snow erase the valley, two strangers bound by necessity and the peculiar intimacy of survival. When night fell, she retired to her small room without ceremony. He heard her moving about, settling in, making a nest of the space he'd given her. Later, when the cabin was quiet, he sat by the fire and wondered what he'd done. He'd lived 2 years in chosen solitude, speaking to no one beyond necessity, keeping the world at rifle's length. Now, a woman with Chicago vowels and nowhere to go slept under his roof, bringing all her complications with her. But he remembered her eyes in that stable ready for death but not asking for it. Broken but not bent. He'd seen too many people give up in the war, watched the light leave their eyes before their hearts stopped beating. She still had light, banked low but burning. Maybe that was reason enough. Maybe saving one person who still wanted saving could balance some cosmic ledger he'd stopped believing in. Or maybe he was just a fool who'd forgotten that some wounds came from kindness as easily as cruelty. The fire burned low. Outside, snow continued its patient work of erasure. Tomorrow would bring questions from her, from himself, from a town that would eventually notice where their discarded woman had gone. But tonight, she slept safe under his roof, and that was enough. He'd learned in the war to take victories where he found them, small and temporary though they might be. "You're safe now," he'd told her, and for tonight at least, he'd made it true. The first morning set the pattern for those that followed. Nora woke before dawn, dressed quickly in the cold room, and had coffee brewing before Elijah emerged from his corner of the cabin. No words about it, she simply took up the rhythms of keeping house as if they'd negotiated every detail. He didn't hover. After breakfast, he'd disappear outside to tend his few animals or work on the endless repairs an isolated cabin demanded. She'd clean, organize, make small improvements to his Spartan existence. By evening, they'd share a meal and separate again, each guarding their own silence. 3 days passed before she asked about the medical texts. You were a surgeon, not a question. She'd been dusting the shelves, handling each book like it might break. Field surgeon, 3rd Michigan Infantry. But not anymore. He looked up from the harness he was mending. Hard to operate when your hands shake. She studied him, not with pity, which he would have hated, but with the measured assessment of someone who understood that some wounds didn't bleed. Do they always shake? Not always, not predictably. He held up his right hand, steady for the moment. Some days are better, some worse. Surgery requires certainty. She returned to her dusting. My father's hands shook near the end. The drink, not war, but I learned to watch for the good hours, when he could still write letters or hold a cup. She paused. Perhaps healing doesn't always require steady hands. He didn't answer, but something in the air between them shifted slightly, like ice beginning its long consideration of spring. The 4th day brought supplies running low. He'd planned to ride to town before finding her, and the delay couldn't stretch much longer. She sensed it in how he rationed the flour, counted the coffee beans. I'll go, she said over breakfast. No. You helped me. The least I can do is fetch supplies. They won't sell to you. Then I'll find another way. Her jaw set in a line he was beginning to recognize. I won't hide here forever, eating your food and contributing nothing. You've been working housework, tidying. That's not enough. She stood, already reaching for the cloak Clara Hensley had given her. Make a list. I'll manage. He could have stopped her. Should have, perhaps. But something in her needed to face the town that had rejected her, to prove she hadn't been broken by it. He understood that need, remembered his own first steps back into the world after the war. Take the horse, he said finally. And this, he pulled money from a tin. Don't argue about paying later, just get what we need. The ride down took longer than his familiar route. Nora picked her way carefully, learning the trail. In town, faces turned to track her progress down Main Street. Whispers followed like a wake. At the general store, the proprietor's kind eyes turned hard. Can't help you, miss. I have money. Not about money. She laid the coins on the counter. Mister, Ward needs supplies. You turn away his business because I'm carrying it. The man shifted, uncomfortable. Elijah rarely came to town, but when he did, he paid well and caused no trouble. More importantly, he'd treated the man's son last winter when the boy had taken fever and Doc Harrison was too drunk to ride out. Ward sent you. I work for him now. Housekeeping. She kept her voice level. Matter of fact. The list, if you please. He took it reluctantly, filling the order with obvious displeasure. Other customers gave her wide berth, but she felt their stares like physical touches. At the counter, paying, she heard Matthew Reed's name whispered behind her. Saw her riding Ward's horse. You don't think she's... Poor man. First the war breaks him. Now this schemer. She left before she could hear more, loading supplies with hands that wanted to shake. The ride back seemed longer, weighted with more than goods. Elijah was waiting at the door. Having heard the horse, he helped her unload without comment, but she caught him checking the supplies, noting what she'd managed to get. "They almost didn't sell to me," she said. "But they did. Only because of you. Your reputation." She pulled off the cloak, hung it carefully. "They think that we're—" "I know what they think. Doesn't it bother you?" He considered this while storing the coffee. "I stopped caring what Red Hollow thinks the day I came back from the war, and they looked at me like I'd brought death home in my pockets." Maybe I had. He turned to face her. "Does it bother you?" "It should." She worried at the cuff of her sleeve, a nervous habit he'd noticed. "My reputation is ruined. No decent man would—" "But then I came here for a decent man. Didn't I look how that ended? Reed's not decent. He's just rich enough to pretend." "Is there a difference?" "You know there is." They prepared dinner together, moving around each other with growing familiarity. She'd learned he liked his coffee black but his porridge sweet. He'd noticed she hummed while cooking hymns mostly, half-remembered from childhood. After eating, she surprised him by pulling out a small sewing kit. "Your shirt, the one on the peg. The shoulder seam is splitting." "I can—" "No, you can't. I've seen your mending." She held out her hand. "Consider it part of my duties." He fetched the shirt, watched her settle by the fire with it. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency. Stitches so small they seemed to disappear into the fabric. The domestic scene should have felt intrusive, too intimate for their careful arrangement. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place. "My mother taught me," she said without prompting. "Said a woman's worth could be measured in her stitches. Small, even invisible." She smiled without humor. "I spent years trying to make myself the same way. Small, even invisible. Look where it got me." "Here." "Yes, here." She tied off the thread, examined her work. Sitting in a stranger's cabin, ruining his reputation by association. "I told you I don't care." "But I do." She looked up at him then, firelight catching the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You've been kind. Kinder than you needed to be. I won't repay that by bringing trouble to your door." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this arrangement is temporary, like we agreed. When the weather clears, I'll move on. Find somewhere they don't know my name or my shame." He wanted to argue, but couldn't find the right words. What claim did he have on her staying? What could he offer beyond shelter and silence? She was right, association with her would taint him in the town's eyes, make his already marginal existence harder. Yet the thought of the cabin empty again, of eating alone and watching winter through the windows with no one to share the burden of endurance. He pushed the feeling down, locked it away with all the other things he couldn't afford to want. "The weather won't clear for months," he said instead. "Then we have months." She folded the mended shirt, handed it back. "Enough time to save wages for traveling. Enough time for the scandal to die down, for some new drama to replace me in their minds." "And if it doesn't, if they never forget?" She stood, brushing threads from her skirt. "Then I'll learn to live with that too. We both know some things can't be mended. Mr. Ward, sometimes the best we can do is make sure the damage doesn't spread." She bid him good night, retreating to her small room. He sat by the dying fire, holding the shirt she'd repaired. The stitches were indeed invisible, so carefully done that the fabric seemed whole again, as if it had never been torn. But he knew better. He ran his thumb along the seam, feeling the slight ridge where thread held cloth together. Mended things were never quite the same as whole things. They might function, might even be stronger at the break point, but they carried their history in every fiber. Like him, like her, both of them walking wounded, trying to pass for whole in a world that demanded perfection or invisibility. No wonder she'd ended up at his door. The broken recognized each other, drawn together by some gravity of damage. He banked the fire and prepared for bed, movements automatic after 2 years of solitude. but awareness of her presence colored everything, the creak of boards as she moved about her room, the second cup and plate drying by the sink, the faint scent of lavender from her clothes. Temporary, she'd said. Of course it was. Everything was temporary life. Peace, the absence of pain. He'd learned that lesson in field hospitals, holding men together while they came apart. Nothing lasted. The best you could hope for was a good moment, a clean break, a mended seam that held until it didn't. But for now, she was here. For now. The cabin held two instead of one. For now. That was enough. He lay in the dark, listening to the wind test the walls he'd built, and tried not to think about spring. 2 days after the confrontation at the general store, Nora made her decision. She couldn't hide on the hillside forever, couldn't let Elijah's charity become a crutch. If she was going to survive in Red Hollow or save enough to leave it, she needed work of her own. "I'm going back to town," she announced over breakfast. Elijah looked up from his coffee. "The supplies will last another week." "Not for supplies, for work." She dressed in her best remaining dress, hair pinned severely back. "There's space near the blacksmith's shop. I saw it when I was there. A small storefront, boarded up." "Nora!" "I know what they think of me, but I also know what I can do." She gathered her sewing kit, the few pieces she'd been mending for practice. "I'll start small, repairs only. Eventually, they'll need what I offer more than they need to shun me." He recognized the set of her jaw, the same determination that had kept her alive in that freezing stable. "You'll need rent money. Let me—" "No," softer. "Thank you, but no. I have a plan." Her plan, as it turned out, involved Clara Hensley. The old woman lived in a cottage past the creek, isolated enough that visiting her wouldn't damage Nora's already ruined reputation further. When Nora knocked, Clara opened the door without surprise. "Wondered when you'd come calling tea." They sat in Clara's kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of a life lived long. Pictures covered one wall: children, grandchildren, the daughter whose clothes now warmed Nora. "I need work," Nora said directly, "and a recommendation, if you're willing." Clara sipped her tea, studying Nora with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Why would my word matter? I'm just an old woman who talks to chickens more than people." "Because you're the only person in this town who helped me without wanting something in return." "Maybe I did want something." Clara set down her cup. "Maybe I wanted to see those clothes used again. Maybe I wanted to thumb my nose at Matthew Reed and his kind." She smiled, showing gaps between yellowed teeth. "Or maybe I just remember what it's like to be young and alone with winter coming." She went to a trunk in the corner, pulled out a leather purse. "My husband left me comfortable enough. I'll stake you the first month's rent on that empty shop. Pay me back when you can." "Mrs. Hensley." "Don't argue, girl. At my age, I can waste money how I please." She counted out bills. "But you'll need more than rent. You'll need folks willing to walk through your door." "I know. I thought perhaps if you mentioned to others." "I'll do better than that." Clara stood, energy belying her years. "Get your things. We're going visiting." They spent the afternoon making an odd circuit of Red Hollow's edges, the Chinese laundry where Clara collected her washing, the Mexican families who lived past the railroad tracks, the war widows who took in washing and watched each other's children, places where respectability mattered less than survival. At each stop, Clara introduced Nora simply, "Girls got skillful hands and fair prices. Thought you should know." The responses varied from suspicious to sympathetic, but Clara's word carried weight among those who lived on the margins. By evening, Nora had 3 promised jobs: a torn coat, a child's dress that needed lengthening, a set of curtains worn thin at the edges. The shop rental proved easier than expected. The owner, eager for any income from the long empty space, barely glanced at Nora before taking Clara's money. The building was small, just one room with a storeroom behind, but it had good light from a front window and a small stove for heat. "It'll do," Nora said, running her hand over the dusty counter. "It's a start," Clara corrected. "Now comes the hard part." The hard part began the next morning. Nora arrived early, swept out months of dust and debris, washed the windows until they gleamed. She had no sign yet, but she displayed her mending work in the window neat repairs that spoke of competence. Foot traffic on the street slowed as people noticed activity in the long empty shop. Some peered through the glass, faces twisting when they recognized her. Others hurried past, pulling their skirts aside as if scandal might be contagious. Her first customer came near noon. Maria Santos, one of the women Clara had introduced her to. She brought the torn coat, stayed to chat while Nora worked. Her English was broken but warm, and she didn't seem to care about Nora's reputation. "People talk," Maria said, watching Nora's precise stitches. "They always talk, but talking don't mend clothes. No." By afternoon, word had spread. Not through the proper channels of Red Hollow society, but along the underground rivers where information flowed between those who couldn't afford to care about propriety. A Chinese railroad worker brought torn trousers. A saloon girl asked about fixing a bodice. Nora set her prices low but fair. She worked quickly, efficiently, making each repair as invisible as possible. When customers seemed uncertain, she showed them the mended shirt she wore, one of her own, repaired so well they couldn't find the original tear. She was measuring fabric for the curtains when the door chimed and Matthew Reed walked in. He looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she'd grown taller in the days since the church. His thin mustache twitched as he took in her small domain, the neat workspace, the work in progress, her calm presence behind the counter. "Miss Beckett," he said her name like it tasted sour. "I heard you'd set up shop." "Mr. Reed." She kept her hand steady on the fabric, though her heart raced. "How can I help you?" "You can leave town." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "You've caused enough embarrassment. Have some dignity." "I am having dignity. I'm working for my living." "Working?" He gestured dismissively at her simple shop. "Catering to the lowest elements. This isn't work fit for a proper woman." "Good thing you already determined I'm not proper, then—" His face flushed. "You tricked me, made me believe." "I wrote honestly. You read what you wished to read." She met his eyes directly. "I'm sorry you were disappointed, but that doesn't give you the right to run me out of town." "Doesn't it?" He leaned over the counter. "My family owns half this valley. One word from me and what you'll forbid torn clothes, ban ripped seams." She smiled without humor. "Your influence extends far, Mr. Reed, but not into split fabric. Even rich men need mending sometimes." The bell chimed again. Elijah filled the doorway, taking in the scene with one glance. He entered slowly, deliberately, placing himself between Nora and Reed without seeming to— "Afternoon, Reed." "Ward." Matthew straightened, wary. Everyone knew Elijah had served as a field surgeon, had seen him work on men larger than Reed. The implied threat hung unspoken. "Just having a word with Miss Beckett." Seemed like more than a word. Business discussion about her establishment. "Then discuss." Elijah crossed his arms. "Don't mind me. I'm just here to drop off some mending." Reed's jaw worked. He looked between them, calculation in his eyes. "So the rumors are true. She's living with you." "She works for me, keeps house." Elijah's tone stayed mild, but something in his stance shifted. "Just like she works here, mending clothes, honest work for honest pay? Something wrong with that. When it involves a woman of loose morals." "Careful." The word came quiet but sharp. "You're talking about a lady in her own establishment. Your mother raised you better than that. Or should have." Reed's face went white, then red. His mother had been the town's moral compass before her death, famous for her lectures on proper behavior. The invocation of her memory in defense of Nora clearly stung. "This isn't over," he said finally, backing toward the door. "Don't think you can just settle here like nothing happened." "Nothing did happen," Nora said quietly. "That's what upsets you most, isn't it? That I didn't cry or beg or run away? That I'm still here, still myself, despite your best efforts to make me disappear." Reed left without another word, the door slamming behind him. Nora sank onto her stool, hands finally allowed to shake. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. You were handling him fine." Elijah pulled a bundled shirt from his coat. "This actually does need mending. Caught it on a nail." She took the shirt, grateful for something to do with her trembling fingers. "He won't forget this. He'll make trouble for you now, too." "Let him try." He watched her examine the tear, already planning her repair. "You did well, standing up to him like that?" "I was terrified." "Didn't show." He moved toward the door, paused. "You coming back tonight, or do you need to stay late?" The question seemed larger than its words. She could read the careful neutrality in his voice, the deliberate lack of assumption. He was giving her a choice: continue their arrangement, or begin the separation that seemed inevitable. "I'll be back for dinner," she said, "if that's all right." "It's all right." After he left, she sat in her small shop, surrounded by other people's mending, and felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Chicago. Possibility, not much, perhaps, just a small shop on a side street, catering to those Red Hollow preferred to forget. But it was hers, earned with her own hands and courage. The door chimed again. Another customer, another torn garment, another coin toward independence. She took up her needle and began again, stitching her life back together one invisible seam at a time. The dress arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Nora had opened her shop. Elijah stood in her doorway, holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper as if it might break. "My mother's," he said without preamble. "Been in a trunk since she passed. Thought maybe—" He cleared his throat. "The orphanage over in Willow Creek. They're having their Christmas gathering. Thought it might fit one of the older girls." Nora took the bundle carefully, feeling the weight of more than fabric. In 3 weeks of shared meals and careful conversation, he'd never mentioned his mother. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing deep blue wool, well made but showing its age. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the fabric. "The construction is excellent. Your mother had good taste." "She was a seamstress before she married." He shifted, uncomfortable with revelation. "Taught me to appreciate proper stitching. Came in handy during the war when—" He stopped. "When you had to stitch people instead of cloth." Nora finished gently. "Yes." She spread the dress on her work table, examining seams and hem. The waist would need taking in, the hem shortening for a younger wearer, but the bones of it were sound, waiting to be useful again. "I can have it ready by week's end," she said. "Would you like to deliver it yourself?" "No. Too quick, too sharp." He softened it. "I don't. The children, they remind me too much of the young soldiers. Better if you take it." She nodded, understanding. They'd developed their own language in these weeks, built of silences and small gestures. She knew his hands shook worst in the mornings. He knew she hummed hymns when worried. Neither pushed past the boundaries they'd established. "I'll take good care of it," she promised. He turned to go, paused. "Nora." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She looked up, needle suspended. "The shop. Are you managing financially?" Pride wanted to say yes. Truth won. "Barely. The work comes steady from those Clara introduced me to. But it's all small jobs, low pay. I'm getting by, but not getting ahead." "What about the others, the proper folk?" She smiled without humor. "They'd rather travel to the next town than darken my door. Matthew Reed has made sure of that." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother's friends, Some are still alive, still in town, respectable widows who might remember her kindly, if I wrote to them. Elijah, no. She used his name deliberately. Payment for her own. You've done enough. Your reputation is mine to spend how I choose. He met her eyes. Let me write the letters. What they do with them is their business. After he left, she sat with his mother's dress, thinking about the strange patterns life wove. A month ago, she'd been dying in a stable, prepared to become another cautionary tale about women who reach too high. Now she had work, shelter, and something that might almost be called friendship with a man who understood broken things. She worked on the dress in the evenings, after the shop closed. Each stitch was perfect, invisible, a prayer for the girl who would wear it. She found herself wondering about Elijah's mother, the seamstress who'd raised a son to be a doctor, who'd left behind this dress like a message in a bottle. 2 days later, the first letter arrived. Mrs. Catherine Winters entered the shop like she was visiting a plague house, handkerchief pressed to her nose, but she came, and that was what mattered. Mr. Ward wrote that you do competent work, she said, not looking at Nora directly. I have some items that need attention, minor repairs only. She left a silk shawl with pulled threads, a simple job that Nora completed while she waited. Mrs. Winters examined the repair with a magnifying glass, clearly hoping to find fault. When she couldn't, her expression soured further. Adequate, she pronounced, paying the exact fee without tip. I may return. She did return, bringing a neighbor. Word spread along channels Nora couldn't trace, not enthusiasm, but grudging acknowledgement. The respectable women came at off hours, entering quickly, transacting business with minimal words, but they came. Blood money, Clara called it when she stopped by. They can't stand that you're good at what you do, but they can't stand wearing torn clothes more. The dress was finished by Thursday. Nora wrapped it carefully, adding a small card, in memory of Mrs. Sarah Ward, seamstress. She'd deliver it tomorrow, but tonight she wanted to show Elijah the completed work. She found him at the cabin's table, medical books spread before him. His right hand trembled as he tried to take notes, frustration clear in every line of his body. Bad day, she asked, setting the wrapped dress aside. Bad week. He pushed the books away. Thought I could review, keep the knowledge fresh. Foolish. Not foolish, hopeful. She moved to the stove, began preparing dinner. They'd fallen into this routine she cooked while he talked, or didn't talk, depending on the day. Hope isn't foolish. It is when it flies in the face of facts. My hands won't steady. The tremors are getting worse, not better. I'll never practice medicine again. Perhaps not surgery, she agreed, serving him stew. But medicine is more than cutting. Isn't it you diagnosed Mrs. Chen's breathing trouble from across the street? Told me what herbs would help before I even asked. Observation isn't treatment. Isn't it? She sat across from him. When I was nursing my parents, the doctor who helped most wasn't the one with the steadiest hands. It was the one who saw them, really saw them, who noticed when pain increased before they could voice it, who knew which words would calm their fears. He ate in silence, but she could see him thinking, finally. The dress. Finished. She retrieved it, unwrapped it for his inspection. I kept the original hem length in case the girl is taller than expected. See folded under here, so it can be let down without showing wear. He touched the fabric gently, that tremor barely noticeable. She would have liked you, my mother, would have appreciated your skill. Tell me about her. So he did, haltingly at first. Sarah Ward, who'd sewn for the wealthy families of Detroit before marrying a clockmaker, who'd insisted her son learn letters and numbers beyond what rural schools taught, who'd saved every penny to send him to medical college, dying 2 months before he graduated. She never saw me become a doctor, never knew about the war. He stopped. Perhaps that's kindness. She died believing I'd heal people. You did heal people. Still do, in your way. Nora rewrapped the dress carefully. Healing isn't always about the body. Sometimes it's about reminding someone they're still human when the world tries to tell them otherwise. Their eyes met across the table. The moment stretched, full of things neither could say. Then Elijah cleared his throat, began gathering his books. The orphanage will appreciate the dress, he said. Thank you for making it right. Thank you for trusting me with it. Later, washing dishes while he tended the fire, Nora found herself humming, not hymns this time, but something lighter. When had she last felt light enough for secular songs? That's new, Elijah commented from his chair. Is it disturbing your reading? No, it's nice. The cabin's been too quiet for too long. She continued humming, hands moving through soapy water, and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Not love, she'd learned her lesson about trusting that word, but affection, perhaps connection. The terrifying possibility that she was putting down roots in soil that had already rejected her once. Tomorrow she'd deliver the dress, face the judgment of another town's charitable women. Next week, Matthew Reed would no doubt devise some new torment. The respectable women would continue treating her like a necessary evil. Her reputation would remain in tatters. But tonight, she hummed while Elijah read, and the cabin held warmth against winter's assault. His mother's dress waited to clothe another girl who needed kindness. Small victories, perhaps, but Nora was learning to build a life from such small things. That song, Elijah said suddenly. What's it called? Beautiful Dreamer, Stephen Foster. She glanced over her shoulder. My mother loved it, said it reminded her of courting days, when everything seemed possible. Sing the words. She hesitated. Singing felt more intimate than humming, more revealing, but he asked so rarely for anything. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. She sang softly, hands still in the dishwater. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. The old song filled the cabin, gentle and sad and sweet. When she finished, silence settled between them again, but warmer now, like a quilt they shared. Thank you, he said quietly. You're welcome. She dried her hands, prepared to retire to her small room. At the doorway, she turned back. Elijah, your hands didn't shake. While I was singing, they were still. He looked down at them, surprise flickering across his face. So they were. Perhaps, she said carefully. Healing works both ways. Perhaps we mend what we can reach, and trust the rest to time. She left him pondering that, sitting by the fire with steady hands and his mother's memory wrapped in blue wool, waiting to warm another generation. Small victories. She thought again. Sometimes they were enough. The town meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming winter festival. Nora only learned she was on the agenda when Clara burst into her shop Friday morning, face flushed with indignation. That snake Reed's done it now, Clara announced, not bothering with pleasantries. Put you on the meeting agenda as a matter of public concern. Says your shop is attracting undesirable elements. Nora's needle stilled. Undesirable elements. The Chinese, the Mexicans, the working girls. Clara spat the words like curses. Anyone who doesn't fit his narrow view of proper society, they're my customers. They pay fair and prompt. Course they do, but Reed's running for mayor come spring. Needs something to rail against. Make himself look like a moral defender. Clara's eyes glittered. He's going to demand the town council revoke your business license. Nora set down her sewing, hands surprisingly steady. Can he do that? With enough people behind him? Yes. Clara gripped her arm. You need to be there. Need to speak for yourself. They won't listen to me. Make them listen, And if they won't, Clara smiled grimly. Well, I've got a few cards to play myself. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, Nora's regular customers were stopping by, faces creased with worry. Maria Santos brought her sister, both talking rapidly in Spanish, gesturing toward the street where Reed's supporters had begun gathering. They say we bring trouble. Maria translated her sister's words. Say the town better without us. Without you. The town would fall apart without us, Nora replied, thinking of all the invisible work these women did washing, cooking, cleaning for families who scorned them by day and depended on them by night. Li Wei from the laundry appeared at closing time. Miss Nora, he said in careful English, we stand with you tomorrow, all of us. Mr. Li, that's kind, but it might make things worse. Worse, he smiled sadly. We know worse. This is just same wrapped in new paper. But you helped my wife when baby came early. We remember. That night, Nora found Elijah waiting at the cabin with news of his own. Reed's been busy, he said without preamble. He's got Judge Morrison coming from the county seat. Plans to make it official, legal, not just town opinion. Then it's over. Nora sank into her chair. I can't fight a judge. You can if you have the right ammunition. Elijah pulled out a leather portfolio. I've been thinking about what you said, about medicine being more than surgery. These past weeks, I've been documenting things. The rash on the Patterson boy that Doc Harrison misdiagnosed. Mrs. Chen's breathing troubles. That infected wound the railroad worker had. She looked at the papers, covered in his careful script. Medical notes, diagnoses, treatment recommendations. Elijah, what is this? Proof that this town needs real medical help. Harrison's drunk more than he's sober. People suffer for it. He met her eyes. I've been writing to colleagues back east. There's interest in establishing a proper clinic here, one that would serve everyone, not just those who can afford Harrison's prices. What does that have to do with everything? Reed's platform is about protecting the town's moral fabric. But what about its physical health? What about the children who die from preventable diseases because their parents can't afford treatment? His hands were steady now, gripping the portfolio. If he wants to make this about the public good, let's give him a real discussion. Saturday dawned cold and bright. The town hall filled early, divided into clear camps. Reed's supporters claimed the front row's merchants, cattlemen, the respectable families. Nora's customers clustered in the back, a defiant splash of color against the somber browns and blacks of proper society. Nora sat with Clara and Elijah in the middle, an island between two shores. She'd worn her best dress, hair pinned severely back. No point pretending to be what she wasn't, but she could at least look respectable while being condemned. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, his discomfort obvious. We have several items of business. First, the Winter Festival Committee. Motion to address the matter of public concern first, Reed interrupted. Standing. Some of us have businesses to return to, legitimate businesses. Murmurs of agreement from his section. The mayor sighed. Very well. Mr. Reed, you have the floor. Reed moved to the front like an actor taking his stage. He'd prepared for this. Nora realized. Probably practiced his speech in the mirror. Good citizens of Red Hollow, he began. We face a crisis of moral decline. When we allow certain elements to establish themselves in our midst, we invite chaos, disease, corruption of our youth. He went on, painting Nora's shop as a den of iniquity, a gathering place for undesirables. He never quite said what immoral activities he imagined occurring among the fabric and thread, but his tone implied dark dealings. This woman, he pointed at Nora, came here under false pretenses, attempted to entrap me in marriage through deception. When that failed, she set up shop catering to the lowest elements of society. Chinese, Mexicans, women of questionable virtue. Those people got names, someone called from the back. Got families, too. Reed ignored the interruption. I motion that her business license be revoked immediately for the protection of our community's moral standing. Second, called one of his supporters. The mayor looked uncomfortable. Miss Beckett, do you wish to respond? Nora stood on legs that wanted to shake. The hall fell silent, waiting. She could feel the weight of every eye, some hostile, some sympathetic, most simply curious. Mr. Reed is right, she began, causing a stir. I did come here to marry him, not through deception, but through correspondence. 4 months of letters where I wrote honestly about myself. She pulled the packet from her pocket. I have them here, if anyone cares to read them. Judge for yourselves what deceptions I practiced. Reed's face flushed. Those are private. You made them public when you announced my supposed sins to the entire church. She set the letters on the mayor's desk. But that's past. Let's discuss the present. She moved to the front, claiming the space Reed had vacated. My shop serves those Mr. Reed calls undesirable Mrs. Santos, who takes in washing to feed her 5 children after her husband died in the mines. Li Wei, who works 18 hours a day to send money to his family in China. Yes, even the saloon girls, who deserve warm clothes in winter as much as anyone. They can go elsewhere, Reed started. Where? Nora turned on him. Where should they go when every door closes to them when their money isn't good enough for proper establishments? She faced the crowd again. I mend clothes. Nothing more. Nothing less. If that threatens the moral fabric of Red Hollow, perhaps we should examine what that fabric is made of. Pretty words. Judge Morrison spoke from his seat of honor. But Mr. Reed raises valid concerns about maintaining proper standards. Speaking of standards, Elijah stood, portfolio in hand. Perhaps we should discuss the medical standards in this town. The judge frowned. That's not the matter at hand. Isn't it, Mr. Reed speaks of protecting the community. Let's talk about real protection. Elijah moved forward, his old authority surfacing. Doc Harrison hasn't been sober past noon in 2 years. Last month, a child died of pneumonia that could have been treated. Last week, a railroad worker lost his hand to infection because Harrison was too drunk to properly clean the wound. Now see here, Harrison sputtered from his seat. I have documentation. Elijah placed his portfolio before the judge. Medical notes on cases I've observed. Correspondence with colleagues about establishing a proper clinic, one that would serve everyone, regardless of their ability to pay or their country of origin. The hall erupted in voices. Reed tried to regain control. This is irrelevant. Is it? Nora stepped beside Elijah. You want to revoke my license because I serve the wrong people. But what about businesses that fail to serve at all, that take money for services not rendered? The girl has a point. Someone called out. It was Mrs. Winters, the respectable widow who'd been Elijah's mother's friend. My cousin died last year. Harrison was passed out in his office when they fetched him. More voices joined in, a dam of resentment breaking. Stories of misdiagnoses, bungled treatments, the quiet acceptance that this was simply how things were. Reed's voice rose above the chaos. This is about her shop, not... No. Clara stood, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. This is about you, Matthew Reed, about a small man who got his pride hurt and can't let it heal. The room fell silent. Clara moved forward. Every inch the matriarch she'd once been before age and loss pushed her to the margins. I've lived in this town 60 years, seen it grow from nothing to something. Know what built it, not moral superiority. Work, hard work from all kinds of people. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. Chinese laid the railroad that brings your goods. Mexicans work your mines and ranches. Those questionable women you scorn, they wash your clothes, tend your children, keep your houses while you sit in judgment. She turned to Reed. You want to talk about moral fabric? Let's talk about a man who summons a woman 1,000 miles on false promises, then abandons her in a blizzard because she's too tall. That's the morality you're defending. Reed's supporters shifted uncomfortably. Even the judge looked less certain. I move, Clara continued, that we table this ridiculous motion and discuss something that actually matters, like whether this town wants a real doctor or another decade of Harrison's shaking hands. Second, multiple voices called out. The meeting devolved into heated debate, but the tide had turned. Reed's carefully orchestrated attack had become a referendum on the town's real problems. By the time Mayor Thompson called for order, the momentum had shifted entirely. The motion to revoke Miss Beckett's business license fails for lack of support, he announced wearily. The matter of medical services will be taken up at next month's meeting. As people filed out, Nora found herself surrounded. Maria Santos hugged her. Li Wei bowed deeply. Even some of the respectable women nodded acknowledgement as they passed. Reed pushed through the crowd to confront her. This isn't over. You think you've won? What? Elijah stepped between them, and this time there was nothing subtle about the threat in his stance. Continue harassing a woman who's done nothing but provide honest service. Use your influence to hurt those who can't fight back. His voice dropped. Try it. See how far your family name carries when people learn what kind of man bears it. Reed backed away, but his eyes promised retribution. He left with his remaining supporters, diminished but not defeated. You did it, Clara crowed, gripping Nora's arm. Stood up to him in front of God and everybody? We did it, Nora corrected, looking at Elijah. All of us. The walk back to the cabin was quiet, both processing what had happened. Inside, Nora collapsed into her chair, exhaustion hitting all at once. Thank you, she said, for standing with me, for speaking up. You'd have managed without me. Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to. She studied him across the familiar space. A clinic. It's just an idea, probably foolish. Not foolish, necessary. She smiled. You said it yourself. Medicine is more than surgery. This town needs what you can offer. Steady hands or not. He looked at her with something new in his eyes. Not pity or casual kindness, but recognition, respect, something that might, given time and courage, become more. We make a good team, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed, warmth spreading through her chest. We do. Outside, winter pressed against the windows, but inside, for the first time since stepping off that train, Nora felt the possibility of spring. The storm arrived 3 days after the town meeting, worse than any yet that winter. By noon, snow fell so thick that Nora couldn't see across the street from her shop window. Customers had stayed home, sensing what was coming. She was preparing to close early when the door burst open. Please, miss! A boy of perhaps 10 stood gasping, covered in snow. It's the orphanage! Roof came down! Kids trapped! Nora grabbed her cloak. How many? Don't know. Maybe dozen. Mrs. Garrett sent me to town for help, but nobody. He was crying now, tears freezing on his cheeks. They said it's too dangerous. Where's Doc Harrison? Drunk. Won't come. Nora locked the shop and followed the boy into the storm. The orphanage sat on the town's edge, a ramshackle building that survived on charity and prayers. Through the driving snow, she could barely make out shapes moving frantically near what had been the main dormitory. Mrs. Garrett, the orphanage matron, appeared from the white chaos. Thank God, the whole east wing collapsed. We got most out, but there's 3 still inside. Maybe 4. I can hear crying, but... A hand gripped Nora's shoulder. Elijah, materializing like a ghost from the storm. He carried his medical bag, the one she'd seen gathering dust on his shelf. How long since the collapse? His voice held the same steady command she'd heard at the town meeting. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Show me. The damage was worse than Nora had imagined. Heavy snow had crushed the old roof beams, creating a maze of timber and debris. From somewhere inside came the sound of children crying, muffled and desperate. "I tried to get in," one of the older boys said, "but the beams keep shifting." Elijah studied the wreckage with a surgeon's eye. "The main support is there. If it goes, everything comes down." He set down his bag, pulled off his coat. "I'll need someone small to guide the children out while I brace the beam." "I'll go," Nora said. "No, you're too tall. The space." "Then who?" She looked around at the gathered faces, elderly matrons, young children, a few townspeople who'd braved the storm. No one the right size with the necessary nerve. "I'll do it." They turned to find Reed standing behind them, snow coating his expensive coat. His face was pale but determined. "Matthew," Elijah frowned. "This isn't—" "I know what it is." Reed's jaw set. "I'm the right size, and despite what you think of me, I'm not going to stand by while children die." Elijah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "The beam's unstable. You'll have maybe 5 minutes before my strength gives out. Get in, get 'em, get out. No heroics." Reed shed his coat, revealing his slight frame. "What about you?" "I'll hold as long as I can." Elijah positioned himself under the main beam, testing its weight. His hands were steady as stone. "Nora, organize a chain to get the children away quickly. Mrs. Garrett, have blankets ready." They worked with desperate efficiency. Elijah braced the beam, taking its weight on his shoulders and back. Reed squeezed into the narrow opening, disappearing into darkness. Nora organized the waiting crowd, creating a human chain from the wreckage to the intact portion of the building. "I see them," Reed's voice, muffled but clear. "3 children, huddled in the corner. One's hurt." "Can you move them?" "The little ones, yes, but there's an older girl. Her legs pinned." Elijah's face strained with effort. Snow had soaked through his shirt, and Nora could see the tremor starting in his arms. Not from his usual condition, from the immense weight he held. A child appeared in the opening, a boy of perhaps 6, pushed out by Reed. Nora caught him, passed him down the chain. Another followed, a girl clutching a ragged doll. Both were crying, but mobile. "The beam's shifting," someone called out. "I know," Elijah gritted. The tremor was worse now, his whole body shaking with strain. "Almost got her," Reed called. "Just need to there." A scream from inside. The beam dropped 6 inches. Elijah caught it, muscles standing out like rope, but his knees buckled. "Get out now," he commanded. Reed emerged backward, dragging an older girl who left a trail of blood in the snow. The moment they cleared the opening, Elijah let go, throwing himself sideways as the entire structure collapsed in a thunder of splintering wood and cascading snow. Elijah and Nora ran to where he'd fallen, finding him face down in a drift. She turned him over, heart stopping until she saw his chest rise. "The children?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Safe, all safe." She helped him sit up, noting how his whole body shook now, not the familiar tremor, but the aftermath of impossible exertion. They carried the injured to the orphanage's intact wing. The girl Reed had rescued had a broken leg, bone showing through torn skin. 2 younger ones had cuts and bruises. All were in shock, shivering despite the blankets. "We need a doctor." "Mrs." Garrett said desperately. "You have one." Elijah pushed himself upright, though Nora could see the effort it cost. "Get me hot water, clean cloth, and whatever medical supplies you have." "Your hands," Nora began, "are steady enough." He met her eyes. "Help me." What followed was a lesson in battlefield medicine. Elijah worked with economy born of necessity, directing Nora and even Reed with crisp commands. He splinted the broken leg, cleaned and stitched wounds, assessed for internal injuries, all while fighting his own exhaustion and the tremor that threatened to return. Reed proved surprisingly useful, following orders without complaint, holding children still while Elijah worked. Whatever had driven him to help, He committed fully to it. "The bone needs setting," Elijah said, examining the girl's leg. "It's going to hurt." "Do it," the girl whispered. She couldn't be more than 12. Nora realized. Old enough to understand. "Reed, hold her shoulders. Nora, grip here, above the break." Elijah positioned his hands, and Nora saw them tremble slightly. He breathed deep, centering himself. On 3, 1, 2. The snap was audible. The girl screamed once, then fainted. But when Elijah examined the leg again, the bone sat properly aligned. "She'll heal clean," he said, fashioning a proper splint. "No permanent damage." They worked through the afternoon, treating injuries, organizing the displaced children, salvaging what they could from the collapsed wing. The storm continued its assault, but inside they created a small bubble of order and care. As evening approached, townspeople began arriving. Word had spread of the collapse and the rescue. They brought food, blankets, offers of temporary shelter for the children. Even some of Reed's supporters appeared, shamed perhaps by his example. "We'll take 2 of the young ones." "Mrs." Morrison announced. The judge's wife, who'd sat silent during the town meeting. "Until repairs can be made." Others followed suit. Within an hour, every displaced child had a warm bed promised for the night. Donations of money and materials began flowing in for rebuilding. Nora found herself beside Reed as they watched families claim children for shelter. He looked different, disheveled. Blood on his shirt, soot smudging his face. Smaller somehow, but in a way that made him more real. "Why?" she asked quietly. He was silent long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My sister. She died when she was 8. Fever took her while I hid in the barn. Too scared to help." He glanced at her. "I've been hiding ever since. I suppose, making myself big because I felt so small. And today I was tired of hiding." He straightened his ruined shirt with habitual gesture. "I still don't like you, still think you deceived me, but those children didn't deserve to pay for my pride." It wasn't an apology, but it was perhaps a beginning. Nora nodded, accepting what was offered. Elijah appeared, swaying slightly. "The children are settled. We should—" He stopped, gripping the doorframe. Nora caught his arm. "You're exhausted, and probably injured from holding that beam." "I'm fine." "You're not." Reed stepped forward. "My carriage is outside. Let me drive you both home. It's the least I can do." The ride was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. At the cabin, Reed helped Elijah inside despite his protests, then turned to Nora. "The town meeting, what I said," he struggled with words. "I was wrong about your shop, about the people you serve. Today showed me that. Thank you for saying so. I won't trouble you again. You have my word." He climbed back to his carriage, then paused. "Ward's a good man, better than I am. Don't let him sacrifice himself for others until there's nothing left." After he left, Nora found Elijah slumped in his chair by the cold fireplace. She built the fire quickly, then knelt beside him, checking for injuries. His back was a mass of bruises where the beam had rested. His hands, when she examined them, were steady as granite. "No tremor," she observed. "Not when it mattered." He caught her hands in his. "You were magnificent today, organizing everyone, keeping calm. You held up a building. We all did what we could." He was looking at her strangely, intensely. "Nora, She waited, but he seemed to lose the words. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her palm gently. The gesture was antiquated, courtly, and absolutely perfect. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For reminding me that I'm still a doctor, that these hands, broken as they are, can still heal." She turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "We heal each other. Isn't that what partners do?" Partners, he repeated, testing the word. Is that what we are? If you'll have me, business partners in the clinic you're planning. Partners in whatever comes next. She squeezed his fingers gently. I'm through running from possibilities. He drew her up beside him in the chair, and they sat watching the fire, hands linked, outside. The storm was breaking at last, stars appearing between ragged clouds. Tomorrow would bring the work of rebuilding the orphanage, the clinic plans, their own carefully navigating relationship. But tonight, they'd saved children from the storm. They'd found unexpected allies and revealed hidden strengths. They'd discovered that broken things could still be strong, that mended souls could hold more weight than whole ones. Stay, Elijah said quietly. Not a question of tonight, but of all the nights to come. Yes, Nora answered, meaning both. The fire crackled, warming the cabin that had become home. Somewhere in town, rescued children slept in borrowed beds, safe from the storm, and in a chair built for one but holding two. A doctor and a seamstress sat hand in hand, stitching their lives together with invisible thread. The winter festival arrived 2 weeks before Christmas, bringing with it a tentative thaw in more than just weather. Red Hollow dressed itself in pine boughs and ribbon, merchants hanging lanterns that turned Main Street into a river of golden light. Even the recent storm damage couldn't dampen the town's determination to celebrate. Nora stood before her small mirror, adjusting the green wool dress she'd remade from one of her mother's. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from nerves. Tonight's festival dance would be her first real social event since the catastrophic church meeting months ago. You don't have to go, Elijah said from the doorway. He'd been watching her fuss with her appearance for 10 minutes, saying nothing until now. Yes, I do. She smoothed her skirts one final time. Hiding away confirms their worst assumptions. Besides, Clara will never forgive me if I miss her grand entrance. Clara had decided to attend the festival after years of absence, declaring it time to show these youngsters how it's done. Her enthusiasm had swept up others. Maria Santos and her sisters would be there, Lee Wei's family, even some of the saloon girls who usually kept to their own entertainments. Then we go together. Elijah stepped into the room, and Nora's breath caught. He'd trimmed his hair, shaved carefully, and wore his best suit, the one she'd pressed yesterday while he pretended not to watch. You clean up well, Dr. Ward. As do you, Miss Beckett. He offered his arm with formal courtesy that didn't quite hide the warmth in his eyes. Shall we scandalize the town? The walk down the hill took longer than usual, Nora's boots careful on the icy path. As they approached the town hall, decorated and glowing with warmth, she felt Elijah tense beside her. Second thoughts? She asked. Always, but not about this. He squeezed her arm gently. Not about you. Inside, the hall had been transformed. Pine garlands draped every surface. Candles flickered in mason jars, and a small band played in the corner. The crowd was already thick, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the space. Their entrance caused a predictable stir. Conversations paused, heads turned. Whispers rose like steam. But before the uncomfortable silence could fully settle, Clara's voice boomed across the hall. There you are. Come here, girl. I need someone tall to help me hang this mistletoe properly. The tension broke. People returned to their conversations, though Nora felt the weight of continued glances. She helped Clara with her decoration suspiciously positioned near the punch bowl where maximum mischief could ensue, while Elijah was cornered by Tom Morrison, the judge's son. Heard you're planning a clinic, Tom said, genuine interest in his voice. Father thinks it's a fool's errand, but Mother hasn't stopped talking about it since the town meeting. As the evening progressed, Nora found herself in unexpected conversations. Mrs. Winters approached during a lull in the music. That dress, the older woman said. The stitching on the bodice, is that your work? Yes, ma'am, remade from an older garment. Exceptional technique, Mrs. Winters studied the nearly invisible seams. I have a proposition for you. Miss Beckett, my niece in Denver is getting married come spring. She needs a trousseau, and the seamstresses there are, well, they lack your subtlety. It was an olive branch disguised as business, and Nora accepted it gratefully. Other women, emboldened by Mrs. Winters' approach, began discussing their own sewing needs. Not quite friendship, but no longer open hostility. The band struck up a waltz, and couples began taking the floor. Nora watched from the edges, content to observe, until Elijah appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me." "People will talk." "Let them." He held out his hand. "I'm tired of letting fear dictate our choices." She let him lead her onto the floor, aware of every eye following their movement. His hand was steady at her waist, his steps sure despite her height advantage. They'd never danced together, but somehow they found an easy rhythm. "You're full of surprises," she murmured as he guided her through a turn. Surgeon's training, all about precision and timing. His thumb brushed her waist, a touch so light she might have imagined it. "Also, my mother insisted," said a man who couldn't dance was only half civilized. "A wise woman. She would have liked you," he said, then corrected himself. "No, she would have loved you, would have seen your strength where others see only scandal." The music shifted to a slower tempo. Other couples joined them on the floor, and gradually Nora realized they were no longer the center of attention, just another pair among many, unremarkable in their quiet contentment. "Doctor Ward." A breathless boy appeared at Elijah's elbow. "Come quick, there's been an accident at the mill. Man's hand got caught in the machinery." Elijah's professional mask dropped instantly into place. "Where's Harrison?" "Nobody can find him." "Of course not." He turned to Nora. "I'm sorry. Go." She was already pushing him toward the door. "I'll gather supplies and follow." She ran to her shop for the medical supplies she'd started keeping since the orphanage incident, then hurried to the mill. A crowd had gathered, but they parted for her without question. In the week since the rescue, she'd become Elijah's unofficial assistant, and the town had quietly accepted it. Inside, she found organized chaos. Elijah knelt beside a man whose hand was wrapped in blood-soaked rags, speaking in the calm, steady voice that had gotten them through the orphanage collapse. "Nora, good. I need the suturing kit and carbolic acid." He didn't look up, hands already working to assess the damage. "Someone get me more light, and hot water clean, boiled." She worked beside him without need for instruction, anticipating his needs, steadying the patient while Elijah cleaned and examined the wound. His hands remained rock steady, even when revealing the extent of the damage made several watching men turn away. "3 fingers salvageable," he murmured to her. "The index finger's too damaged, but if I'm careful with the blood flow..." It took 2 hours. 2 hours of delicate work, Elijah's hands never wavering, his concentration absolute. Nora watched him rebuild what could be saved, minimize what would be lost, turn catastrophic injury into manageable disability. When it was done, the man's hand was cleaned, stitched, and properly bandaged. Not whole it never would be again, but functional. The crowd that had watched in tense silence burst into relieved chatter. "He'll need to stay still tonight." Elijah instructed the man's wife. "I'll check on him in the morning. Keep the hand elevated, and if there's any fever or red streaks, send for me immediately." Outside, the festival continued, though news of the accident had dampened some of the revelry. Elijah leaned against the mill wall, exhaustion hitting visibly. "Your hands," Nora said quietly. "Not a single tremor." "No." He looked at them with wonder. "When I'm working, really working, they remember what they're for." He met her eyes. "It's afterward that they forget." She took his hands in hers, feeling the slight tremor already beginning. "Then we make sure you keep working. The clinic will happen." Matthew Reed approached from the shadows, and they both tensed. But his expression held none of its usual hostility. "That was impressive," Reed said grudgingly. "Harrison couldn't have managed half so well, sober or not. Any trained surgeon could have—" "No," Reed cut him off. "I've seen surgeons in Denver, in San Francisco." "What you just did." He straightened his coat, a nervous gesture Nora recognized. "The town needs your clinic. I'll support it at the next meeting." He walked away before either could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Elijah stared after him, stunned. Did Matthew Reed just— "I believe he did." Nora linked her arm through his. "Come, Clara will never forgive us if we miss her grand finale." They returned to find the festival in full swing despite the earlier drama. Clara had indeed orchestrated a grand finale, somehow convincing the band to play, while she led a group of older townswomen in a traditional dance from the town's founding days. "Our grandmothers danced this when the railroad came through," Clara called out, skirts swirling. "When this place was nothing but dreams and dust." It was infectious. Soon half the hall had joined in, young and old, proper citizens and questionable elements, all united in Clara's choreographed chaos. Nora found herself pulled into the circle, hands linked with Maria Santos on one side and Mrs. Morrison on the other, all of them laughing as they tried to follow Clara's increasingly elaborate steps. Elijah watched from the sidelines, a smile playing at his lips. When the dance ended in cheerful disorder, Nora made her way back to him, breathless and glowing. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I'm a mess. My hair's coming down, and I'm fairly certain I just stepped on the mayor's foot." "Beautiful," he repeated, catching a loose strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. His hand lingered against her cheek. Around them, the festival continued, but they might have been alone for all Nora noticed. The candles, the music, the warmth of the hall, all of it faded except for Elijah's eyes, the gentle pressure of his palm against her skin. "Elijah," she breathed. "I know we agreed to be cautious, to take things slowly." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I'm tired of caution. Nora, tired of pretending I don't—" "Well, would you look at that?" Clara's voice boomed directly behind them. "Standing right under my mistletoe and wasting it." Laughter rippled through the nearby crowd. Nora glanced up to indeed find Clara's strategically placed decoration directly overhead. When she looked back, Elijah was smiling a real smile, rare and transformative. "Wouldn't want to waste Clara's efforts," he murmured. "Certainly not," Nora agreed. He kissed her there in the middle of the hall, gentle and sure, while Clara whooped and the crowd reacted with varying degrees of scandal and approval. It wasn't passionate or dramatic, just a quiet claiming, a public acknowledgement of what had been building in private. When they parted, Nora's cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were steady. "That's going to be all over town by morning." "Good," Elijah said firmly. "I want everyone to know that the finest woman in Red Hollow has inexplicably chosen to tolerate my company." "Tolerate," she laughed. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" She considered, aware they were still the center of attention, but finding she didn't care. "I'd call it two people who've learned that being broken doesn't mean being less than whole, that mended things can be stronger than they were before." "To mended things, then—" He offered his arm again. "Shall we give them more to talk about?" "Let's." They danced the rest of the evening, scandalizing proper society and delighting everyone else. By the time the festival ended, Nora's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. The walk home was slow, both reluctant to let the evening end. At the cabin door, Elijah paused. "Tonight changes things." "Yes." She touched his face gently. "Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready since the day you sang in my kitchen." He caught her hand, pressed it to his cheek. "The question is, are you this town maybe learning to accept you, but being with me?" will make us both stronger. She completed his thought with certainty. Together, we're more than the sum of our damage. Inside, the cabin waited, warm and familiar. But now it held promise too of shared mornings and collaborative evenings, of building something greater than either could manage alone. As Nora prepared for bed in her small room, she heard Elijah moving about, banking the fire. The comfortable sounds of home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the clinic to plan, relationships to navigate, a town's perception to continue reshaping. But tonight had proven something vital, that even in a place that had rejected her, even with a reputation in ruins and a future uncertain, joy was possible. Love was possible. Not the desperate grasping of her letters with Matthew Reed, but something steady and sure, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. She hummed as she brushed her hair, not hymns this time, but the waltz they danced to. Through the thin wall, she heard Elijah echo the melody and smiled. Mended things indeed. The snow began to melt in earnest by late March, revealing a world made new by winter's passage. From her shop window, Nora watched the muddy streets of Red Hollow transform day by day, patches of green pushing through the slush, birds returning to nest in the eaves, life reasserting itself with quiet determination. She'd expanded the shop over the winter months. What had begun as a simple mending service now displayed ready-made garments in the window, practical dresses for working women, sturdy shirts for laborers, clothes that valued function over fashion. A sign above the door read, "Beckett's for women who never fit molds." "You're wool gathering again." Clara's voice startled her from her reverie. The older woman had become a daily visitor, as much a fixture in the shop as the sewing machine Nora had purchased with her carefully saved earnings. "Spring makes philosophers of us all," Nora replied, returning to the dress she was hemming. "Were you this distracted when you were young?" "Distracted, child? I was downright moonstruck every spring." Clara settled into what had become her chair. "Course, I had Henry courting me then. That man could make a girl forget her own name with just a smile." Through the window, they watched Elijah emerge from the building across the street, the future site of his clinic. Matthew Reed, true to his word, had not only supported the proposal but invested substantially. The clinic would open next month, serving all of Red Hollow regardless of ability to pay. "He's been there since dawn," Nora murmured. "Man on a mission." Clara's eyes twinkled. "Though I suspect he'll be finding his way here soon enough. Always does around midday." As if summoned, the shop door chimed. Elijah entered, bringing the scent of sawdust and spring air. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked with honest labor. "Ladies," he nodded to Clara, but his eyes found Nora. "Thought you might like to see the examination room. The cabinets are installed." "Go on," Clara urged when Nora hesitated. "Shop won't fall apart without you for an hour." They walked across the muddy street, Elijah's hand steady at her elbow. Inside the clinic, the transformation was remarkable. What had been an empty storefront now held purpose: an examination room, a small surgical space, a waiting area with chairs Clara had donated. "It's wonderful," Nora said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the examination table. "Your mother would be so proud." "I hope so." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her explore. "I've been thinking about staffing. I'll need help, especially with my hands still unpredictable." "I'm sure you'll find someone qualified." "I already have, if she'll accept." He pulled a paper from his pocket. "I've been corresponding with the nursing school in Denver. They have a program for practical experience. You'd train here under supervision, while working." Nora took the paper with trembling hands. "Elijah, I can't. The shop." "Would run perfectly well with part-time hours. Maria's daughter has been asking about apprenticing with you." He moved closer. "You have the instincts. Nora, I've seen it. The way you anticipated my needs during surgery. How you stayed calm during crisis. This town needs more than one person who can help when things go wrong. She studied the letter, seeing possibility written in formal language. What would people say, a woman training in medicine? The same things they said about a woman running a shop, about a failed doctor opening a clinic, about two broken people finding each other in a blizzard. His hands covered hers. Since when do we let their words stop us? Through the window, she could see her shop, the sign proud above the door. She'd built that from nothing, in a town that had wanted her gone. Built it with stubborn determination and invisible stitches. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll do it. His smile transformed his face. Years falling away. He spun her around in the small space, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, they were close, breathing the same air. I love you, he said, the words falling between them like spring rain. I should have said it months ago. I know. She touched his face gently. I've known since you held up that beam, since you chose saving those children over protecting yourself. Maybe even since you said I was safe. And you, do you. Love you with every stitch I've sewn, every dawn we've shared, every tremor I've watched still under my touch. She smiled. Yes, Elijah Ward, despite all good sense and propriety, I love you. He kissed her then, there in the unfinished clinic with sawdust in the air and spring light streaming through windows. It was different from their public kiss at the festival deeper. Sure, promising a future neither had dared imagine months ago. A knock at the door broke them apart. Tom Morrison stood outside, grinning broadly. Sorry to interrupt, but thought you'd want to know. Town council just voted to officially hire you as the municipal physician, doc, salary and everything. But I haven't even opened yet. Reed pushed it through, said the mill accident proved we couldn't wait for Harrison to sober up anymore. Tom's expression grew serious. Between you and me, I think that rescue at the orphanage changed something in him. He's been different since... better. After Tom left, they stood in the dusty afternoon light, processing how much had changed. The woman who'd arrived on a winter train, abandoned and desperate, now had a business, a purpose, a future. The man who'd hidden on a hillside, convinced his usefulness had ended with his steadiness, now prepared to serve again. We should tell people, Nora said eventually, about us, properly. At dinner tonight, Clara's organizing another one of her gatherings. Perfect. She'll be thrilled to take credit. That evening, Clara's house overflowed with guests. The old woman had indeed outdone herself, turning her simple home into a celebration of spring and community. Maria and her sisters had cooked, Lee Wei's family had brought tea, and even some of the proper townswomen had appeared, curiosity overcoming reservation. Nora wore her green dress again, the one from the festival. Elijah had trimmed his beard and worn his good suit. They entered together, no longer pretending their connection was mere convenience. About time, Clara crowed when she saw them. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in a room together. The evening passed in warmth and laughter. Stories were shared of the long winter. Plans made for the spring. The clinic's opening dominated conversation, with townspeople offering donations of supplies and time. As dinner wound down, Elijah stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent, expectant. I want to thank you all for supporting the clinic, he began, for trusting me despite my limitations, for believing this town deserves better than it's had. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. But I also want to share something personal. He reached for Nora's hand, drew her to stand beside him. This winter brought me more than purpose. It brought me partnership. Nora has agreed to train as a nurse, to help run the clinic, and more importantly, she's agreed to marry me. The room erupted. Clara whooped loud enough to rattle windows. Maria and her sisters burst into rapid Spanish congratulations, even Mrs. Winters smiled genuinely as she applauded. When? Someone called out. Soon, Nora answered, finding her voice. Before the clinic opens, we want to begin this new chapter properly partnered. Here's to new chapters. Clara raised her glass. To broken people who refuse to stay broken. To a town learning to mend its ways. To love found in blizzards and strengthened by spring. The toast echoed through the room, glasses clinking, voices joining in celebration. Later, as guests departed and dishes were cleared, Nora and Elijah walked home through streets no longer hostile. No grand ceremony, Nora said as they climbed the hill. Just something simple, honest. In the church where Reed rejected you. Yes, her jaw set with familiar determination. I want to stand in that same place and choose joy over bitterness. Show myself that rejection was just redirection towards something better. Then that's what we'll do. At the cabin, they paused on the porch, looking down at Red Hollow spread below. Lamplight glowed in windows, the town settling into evening peace. Somewhere an owl called, first voice of the night hunters. Still working? The question made her smile, remembering all the evenings he'd asked it at her shop door. Always, she answered, their old ritual. Then I'll wait. But this time, he added, forever, if needed. I like watching your hands stitch light into this broken world. She turned to him, this man who'd saved her with quiet words and steady presence, who'd shown her that strength didn't require perfection, that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. No more waiting, she said softly. We've both waited long enough. Inside, their cabin soon to be truly theirs welcomed them with familiar warmth. The fire needed banking. Dishes waited in the sink, ordinary tasks that somehow felt sacred in their simplicity. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The clinic to finish, training to begin, a wedding to plan, a town's perception to continue reshaping. There would be difficult days when Elijah's hands shook too badly to work, when old prejudices surfaced, when the weight of their unusual story pressed heavy. But tonight, spring had come to Red Hollow, and in a cabin on the hillside, two people who'd learned to mend themselves were discovering that together. They could help mend the world around them, one invisible stitch at a time. The future spread before them like fresh fabric, waiting to be shaped by skilled hands and hopeful hearts. And Nora Beckett, who'd arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a promise, now had everything that mattered: purpose, love, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the best patterns were the ones you created yourself. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, no longer a sound of judgment but of possibility. And in the Wyoming darkness, under stars that had witnessed her lowest moment, Nora began to hum not hymns of sorrow, but songs of spring. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Nora and Elijah's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to know where in the world this tale is reaching and hear your thoughts about their story. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these tales of courage and love in the American frontier, please hit the hype button. Your support helps these stories reach more listeners who appreciate authentic historical fiction. Until next time, keep riding those dusty trails of imagination